Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about something that everybody needs to know, and that's how to take apart your rifle or pistol and to clean it, maintain it, go over and do what we would call like preventive maintenance or just regular maintenance. So this is kind of coming off the heels of the Tactical Games athlete camp that Blair and I both attended. So it was a 3-day camp that went over, physical fitness and shooting and some really good information that helped you bring both of those worlds together and make you a better. So fantastic people there that were training you on the physical side and on the shooting side. I got to meet really cool people that I had never met before. So I know sometimes how you meet or you talk on Instagram, and I talk to a lot of people on Instagram, and I help out anybody I can. And so it's kind of cool when you get to meet and they say, hey, I've actually talked to you on Instagram before. And I was like, oh, okay, what's your name? And they tell me your name. It's like, oh yeah, that's you, I get it. So that's really cool when you get to see those people. So this isn't really an in-depth on the Tactical Games athlete camp, but this is more of dealing with your weapons. But the reason why I'm doing this is because at the end of the end of the second day, Jared broke down the how-tos of how to build your own rifle, or if you wanted to swap out a barrel or change a trigger out. He basically was like, he went through the nuances of the AR platform and how he works on his and different scope mounting options, and it was really good information. It was a good class. So directly after that, I was talking with some people, and some of the questions were coming up. They're like, well, I don't even know how to take my gun apart, or I'm not real comfortable with taking it apart. I don't even know what I should be doing to clean this. So I said, well, I went through like a real basic impromptu breakdown of like an AR. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll come back and I'll make a video. So that's what this is. This is going to be how to take apart your AR and pistol in a couple different types. I know I don't have everyone's pistol that's out there, but there's really only so many types of pistols that how they break apart. Glocks are pretty much the most unique one. As far as everyone else, Smith & Wesson, SIGs, Springfield Armory, those all take apart the exact same way. And I'll kind of go over what I have, and I'll show you the ways to take them apart and do whatever. So we're gonna go through how to do that. And you might be asking yourself, why doesn't he have an optic on here? I'm glad you asked. So this is a brand new firearm that I got from Sons of Liberty Gunworks. So I am now sponsored by them. And so this was my rifle that they sponsored me with. And it's brand new, it's right out of the box. Haven't shot it yet, haven't done anything with it yet. And maybe some people don't know this, but even with a brand new firearm, you should clean it before you use it. And the reason why is because a lot of times they don't know how long that firearm is going to be setting up, maybe in a shop, maybe in a warehouse. So there's a preventative. Sometimes the manufacturers will put some sort of rust preventative, or they douse it in oil or some sort of CLP. And so you want to get all that preservative off, and you want to make, and also at the same time, this is a brand new manufactured item, just in case take like the barrel, if there's any kind of shavings or anything that's left over from the manufacturer of making that barrel, they put these barrels on, they're not cleaning them before you buy them and shoot them. So you definitely want to go through it all, clean it, and you're checking it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use this one, and we're going to go and check it out. So this and a couple of pistols, and we'll go from there. All right, so here we are about to break down the AR type platform. So this is the best way I could find an angle to kind of show you how to work on this. So starting off with the AR, you really have two main parts to this firearm. You have the upper receiver and you have the lower receiver, and they are held together by two pins. These are called the takedown. The easiest thing to call them is a takedown pin, but technically they're called like a pivot pin and a takedown pin. But I'm going to be using just very basic terms. So if somebody wants to get super critical and say that's not what that's called, then so be it. But this is basically going to be like a layman's terms breakdown of how to disassemble and clean the AR platform. Okay, so upper receiver, lower receiver, takedown pins. So what we do is you push and you pull on the other side, right? And I find that take the one towards the rear out first, and it makes it easier. And then I'll press this one and I'll wiggle it, and that will allow me to pull that pin out. These are captured pins, okay? So what that means is that they won't fully come out, and that's a good thing. That way you don't lose them, right? So now we have separated the upper receiver and the lower receiver, okay? So let's deal with the lower receiver first. What do you have to do for preventive maintenance on a lower receiver? Not a lot. Basically what you're doing is you're making sure that there isn't anything foreign inside your space where the trigger is housed. You're making sure that the trigger pins are flush with the receiver. And so first thing is you never want to dry fire your trigger. So you put it on safe and you can depress it and capture the hammer with your finger, because that's what this is called. This is your hammer. That's what hits the firing pin, which fires the bullet. But like the knee bone connected to the leg bone, or however it goes, right? So that's what this part is right here. Inside here you have what's called the buffer and the buffer spring, right? And it's held in place by this little pin. And if you were at the athlete camp, this is what Jared was talking about when he was talking about what he doesn't put in his firearms, is this little piece right here. This little piece right here is the buffer retainer pin, right? So what that does is that just holds this buffer, which is the weight, and then the buffer spring in, right? So when your weapon fires and that bolt carrier group goes back and forth, what it's doing is it's compressing this spring, and that's what's buffering the recoil, right? So buffer spring. Honestly, I don't ever put any oil on this. I mean, we never even did in the military. Mainly all we ever really did was just wipe it down, make sure there wasn't any foreign obstructions inside your receiver extension or your buffer tube, which is, you know, in here. You want to make sure there's nothing in there. And I just always wiped them down and just called it good. Anytime you add lubricant or oil to something, that attracts particles of dust, dirt, debris, and so if you're not trying to attract any of that, you just kind of wipe it down. You can put some lubrication on the points of contact on the trigger, basically the engagement surfaces. Let's see if it'll focus. Yeah, so the parts that are engaged, or that where the trigger engages, there, and you can basically see, if you look in your trigger and you see where something catches and then something releases, basically just put a little bit of grease there, maybe a little high viscosity oil, and that will help marry the surfaces and kind of wear it in just a little bit. But honestly, this is really all you got to do with the lower receiver. There's really not a lot. there's not a whole lot you really need to do to maintain this. You're really just looking for things out of place, you know. So on your castle nut here, that's a good idea to have some sort of witness mark, and so that's where, you know, that's something you could put a witness mark on to show that things aren't backing out or moving, right? So that's your lower receiver. The upper receiver, this is where you're going to spend the majority of your time cleaning, maintaining, and doing anything else, right? So on the upper receiver, normally you'd have your optic or whatever else on there, but like I said, this is brand new, so I don't have anything on there yet. But on the upper receiver, you have your bolt carrier group, or BCG, right? Believe it or not, this is 5 different parts. If you've never taken one apart, there are 5 parts to this. And then in here, you have your charging handle, okay? And then you just have your upper receiver with your chamber. I'll try and, kind of hard to show you what's in there. I'll get a better angle later, but so your charging handle, basically what you're doing is you are just going to wipe it down. You can put a little lubricant on the sides, maybe a little bit on the inside, but basically what all you're doing is you're just trying to make this metal on metal slide a little bit easier. That's really all this is doing, right? So bolt carrier group, okay? So this one is a little snug, so I need to get something to kind of help me get the where the firing pin, retaining pin is, right? So on here, these are the parts of the bolt carrier group. You have the bolt, you have your gas key, and then this is your bolt carrier, right? So to start, the first part you need to do to take this apart is there's this thing right here called the firing pin, retaining pin, right? And so what this does, it's like a little cotter pin, and it retains the firing pin. First thing, when you take that out, try not to put it somewhere that's too dark. You want to put it on because these things will disappear. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll just take it and I'll put it inside the channel of my charging handle, because at least I know where it's at every time, right? So the next thing from there is I tilt it down, and you can see the firing pin is coming out. So I pull that firing pin out, and that is your firing pin. And basically what you're doing with this is you're just checking to make sure nothing's out of place, right? So it has a little tip, make sure that it's not broken off, right? Making sure nothing else is broken or fractured of any way. Really, you're just looking to make sure if these are going to fail, they're going to fail like in the middle or at the tip. I mean, it's going to be pretty obvious when these break, right? So the next thing you're going to look at is your bolt cam pin, right? So your bolt needs to push in, and what you need to do is you need to take this cam pin and you need to rotate it just that way so it can come out, right? So now we've taken our cam pin out, and the reason why you have to turn it, so when it's in the bolt carrier, it's facing like this, and when you want to remove it, you have to turn it 90 degrees to turn it out. The reason why is because that's the way the firing pin goes through the cam pin, right? So that's locking it in there. So if you don't turn it, when you go to insert the firing pin, there's physically no way for it to go through, right? So there's your cam pin. So from there, you just take out your bolt, and this is your bolt, right? So the firing pin, when it's inside, is actually like this. So it fires through, right? And you can kind of see that protrusion right there of the firing pin, and that's what hits the primer on your round, and that's how it works, right? these are your gas rings, okay? So the gas rings are what makes a seal, because the AR is a gas operated weapon, right? So when you fire a round, there is this thing called a gas block. You can kind of see it right there, and you can see the tube coming off of it. So when you fire a round, gas enters the gas block, goes down that gas tube, and when it goes down that gas tube, it actually hits the gas key, because this gas key is actually touching right there, right? Let me get a better pointer here. You can kind of see what I'm talking about. So it's touching this gas tube right there, right? So that gas key is touching that, and when the gas goes down, that's what starts unlocking the bolt, and that's what cycles it, right? So the easy way to test to make sure your gas rings are good is you would just pull your bolt out to where it's supposed to be, right? So if it was normally, and then if you just put it down and let it stand on its own weight, as long as the bolt doesn't collapse on itself, right? Then you are good. So the gas rings are good, right? This part right here, so you can look at your bolt face and you can see that it looks like a gear wheel, right? And the one piece that looks a little different, that's your extractor, okay? And then this right here is your ejector, right? So that is that has tension on it. There's a spring underneath it, and so your extractor and your ejector, okay? We're not going to go into taking that apart just yet, because that's not something you need to do every time you break down your rifle, but this is the basic takedown of your rifle, what you should be doing when you're going to clean it, and just preventative maintenance, right? That is broke down your bolt carrier group into 5 different pieces, right? So now let's go ahead and show what I do to go ahead and start cleaning. Basic things that you need to just get a decent cleaning on your bolt carrier group. Just a good CLP, or like an oil. So CLP stands for cleaner lubricant protectant. So basically this is something that's going to get some of that grease or that packing oil that's sometimes on brand new firearms, but it also will help break down any kind of carbon or anything else that's on a dirty firearm. Next thing is a AP brush. So AP brush is like an all-purpose brush. You can use like a toothbrush, but these are pretty inexpensive, and so you can see this one's pretty well used. And so it's just, all you're doing is, this is for like a broad, larger area, and this is for like a smaller, tighter space that you need to get into. I use quite a bit of Q-tips, and that helps me. They make, actual gunsmithing Q-tips, but I mean, you can go to the Dollar General or whatever and just get regular ones, and that works just fine. And then just I got like some painter's rags, just some stuff that you can get inexpensive, just something to start wiping down. So pretty simply, all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add, so you can add it directly to the item you're trying to work on, right? And you can throw whatever's on there, and then just kind of, you're just trying to, right? If you do work on the bolt face, make sure you don't have a lot of oil on the bolt face, because any kind of liquid can cause a malfunction if you leave it there. You don't want a lot of oil or anything around your firing pin. So, and that's really, you're just trying to get the base gunk out of there, and just check to make sure. I mean, this one's not going to have a ton of stuff in it. This one's really just going to have any kind of packing material or any manufacturing oils or whatever on there. So just get any kind of yep, there we go. We just get a little bit of that off there. The firing pin, retaining pin, honestly, you don't really have to do much with that. You just kind of, I don't know, just wipe it down. Really, there's really not a whole lot you do with this. Just make sure you don't let it spread out too wide because it makes it harder to work with. Same thing with the cam pin. So the other way, what you can do is you can just oil your brush, right? And you just, right? Nothing groundbreaking, nothing super exciting, right? So just wipe that. Now, firing pin, I don't put any oil on this. Honestly, what I do is I just wipe it off, right? So if it was dirty, you can clean it. And a lot of times what you'll find is you'll find a hard carbon ring that'll form on the bottom side. And so you can put some sort of cleaner lubricant on there, let it sit, come back with your brush, and you can try and knock that off. It's not really hurting anything unless it gets like really, really raised up. But for the most part, you're going to have a carbon ring there, and it's going to be okay. I know I try and get all of it off, but that's mainly due to like OCD from like just boot camp and stuff, and they just drill that you need to scrub that off, but it's mostly going to be all right. So the next thing you do is for the bolt carrier. What I do is I'll just run this down, right? And what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get, if there was a lot of carbon and things like that, any kind of fouling, powder residue, this is what I'm trying to get off, right? And you're just going to scrub that down. And I take the brush and I'll go on the inside and I'll scrub it in there. I'll scrub, change directions. And when I need to go in through here, what I'll do is I'll go to the smaller brush, throw some oil in there, and I will scrub in there, scrub in there. Same thing in the bolt face, or where the bolt would go. Scrub in there. And what I'm doing at this point is I'm just going to wipe off the excess, right? And the nice thing about having a phosphate finish is that it's porous. So when you throw oil on there, it actually will start to embed itself into the material, and it actually leaves a, I mean, I don't want to say permanent, but it's going to start to leave oil in the material more so than if it's so nitriding and nickel boron basically hardens, it's a hardened shell around your material, so it doesn't allow that oil to penetrate, but with phosphating it actually does. So after I get everything done, what I typically do is I'll just run a little bit of oil on the sides, right? And the bearing surfaces on this bolt carrier are going to be there, so you can kind of, so you can kind of see this rail right here. So here along there, obviously right there, and then on the opposite side right there, and then anywhere metal is going to rub on other metal, you're going to see it rub along through here. I like to make sure there is oil. I put a thin coat with my fingers just over the whole thing, right? And then I'll take Q-tip, throw some oil in there, and I'll go in the grooves, right? And I make sure that the bearing surfaces of the bolt carrier have oil. So here, here, and just a thin coat over the whole thing. It's not going to hurt it, right? And so that is the kind of a expedited way to kind of clean it, right? So it's got a little bit of oil on it. Now, when we're putting this back together, I'm going to do the same thing to the bolt, and I have residual on my fingers, so I'm just going to put that around there. I might do just a little bit more. And so again, now we're looking at the bolt face, right? So this is the bolt face. Like I said before, the part that looks different is going to be your extractor, right? So this cam pin only goes in one way, right? So you're asking yourself, how do I make sure I put this in the right way the first time, every time, versus having to guess, right? So what we do is push your bolt in, and your bolt's going to spin freely, right? So what I do is make sure it's at the 11 o'clock as you're looking at it. If it's at the 11 o'clock, you're always going to be right. And so when you look at this, you're seeing your bolt in there, and that's where your cam pin is going to go. So what you're going to do is you're going to line that. You have to pull out just slightly. Align that hole, right? Making sure it's still at the 11 o'clock. Find that hole. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that cam pin, we're going to drop it in, right? And what I do to make it the easiest way is I pull my bolt forward, turn the cam pin that 90 degrees, right? Imagine this being vertical. What I do is I cover up the top and bottom so the firing pin can't fall out going, falling out sideways. So I cover that up, and imagine this being vertical. I drop that down and I seat the firing pin. Okay, so now the firing pin is seated. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that firing pin retaining pin, right, and I am going to start it in the hole. And so sometimes you just have to twist it, and I'm going to apply just slight downward pressure, right? So I'm going slightly down, so it basically you're trying to push the pin in straight, and when we go to push the pin in, sometimes it'll want to push down, so, or it wants to go down in a downward angle. So what I do is I apply downward pressure and twist, and what it does is it allows the pin to go in smooth. If it starts fighting you, stop, because otherwise you're going to push out the pins, and it's going to make it more difficult to put back together, right? And so that is the disassembly and reassembly of your bolt carrier groove, right? So what you're wanting to do next is work on cleaning your upper. What I use to help kind of clean the upper receiver and the barrel, right? So you're going to need some sort of what they call a bore guide, and what this one's from Real Avid, but what I like, basically what it does is this part right here goes inside the chamber, and it allows you to push a cleaning rod directly to the barrel without hitting the chamber. right? So it protects the chamber, and this particular one has a little spot for if you're gonna call it like a solvent port, basically. So when you're running your your cleaning rod through, when you start it, you just put a little, where your patch is, you just put a little bit of whatever solvent you're using, and allows you to run it through, right? So what that looks like is when you push this in and it locks in, and actually when you have your lower receiver, what this one does is you put your receiver together, put this in, this actually locks in with your takedown pin, so it holds it at an angle, right? So when you go to put your cleaning rod, it holds it down at an angle so everything is going downwards, right? So the cleaning rod that I use is what they call like a Dewey rod, or a J Dewey rod. But the reason why I like using these, I started using these with bolt action rifles, but I use them for pretty much pistols and all types of rifles, is that it has a bearing in the handle. So when you go to use the rod, right, and you're pushing it down, that the rifling allows, or the bearing allows the rod to spin along with the rifling, and so it spins freely. So that's, and I like using a coated rod, because what you're trying to do is you're not trying to have any kind of raw metal hit the inside of the barrel or in the chamber, right? So brass is going to be softer than the steel that's in there, so the brass will give before the steel in there will, but at the same time you're still not trying to like go at an angle and poke the barrel. So that's why the bore guide is a really good thing, because it aligns everything in line and helps you. So this is a bore brush, okay? So it is a bronze brush, so the bristles are made out of bronze, and you'll hear some people say you don't want to use bronze, you want to use nylon. So they say that this brass or bronze is going to hurt the steel of the barrel. So I'm not a metallurgist, I'm not a machinist, but I do know that if the material here is softer than the material it's going against, this will not hurt that. But after your barrel wears in a little while, I do know you can get this thing called fire cracking, and basically for all intents and purposes, your barrel has these little fissures or cracks in it, and that's when these brushes can start grabbing at it. So at that point, maybe there could be some truth to this harming your barrel, but in the beginning when you're just trying to clean it, it's really not doing it. And if you have a chrome lined barrel, then you have to worry about it even less, because the chrome lining is fairly hard. So that's what you would use to kind of break up some of the carbon, right? So the other things that you're looking at is what they call a jag. So these are the two types of jags you're going to have. Kind of like a, let's see if I can make sure I'm focusing. So a spear point jag, and then a Parker Hale style jag. So, but basically they're both doing the same thing, is that they are, and then you have this thing called an eyelet. And the eyelet is what usually comes with most cleaning kits, but the eyelet just has just that round hole, and you push the patch in, and you're supposed to push that patch through the bore. The problem with that is that you miss certain areas in the inner diameter, whereas the the jag gives you a full 360 coverage on the inside of the diameter. The spear point just allows you to puncture that patch and run it through. The Parker Hale style has these little ridges, and what it does is you just physically wrap the patch around it and you push it through. So if you want the patch to stay on, let's say you're trying to go back and forth and you're not trying to put a new patch on every time, that's where the Parker Hale kind of comes in handy. Whereas when you're done with this one, when you push it through to the end of the barrel, it'll knock the patch off when you're coming back through, right? So that's the difference between the two Jags. Whatever kind of solvent you have, like a hops, or you can use CLP, like that's a Radco Lube CLP. You can use, like if you're at the athlete camp, Jared talked about some other solvents. But basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to break up the carbon and any kind of possible copper fouling. I typically run 2 patches through. One patch, and then I grab another patch and I soak it with a bore cleaner. I run it through, and I will let that sit for about 5 minutes. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to put the bore brush on, and I am going to put that same bore cleaner on that bore brush, and I'm going to run that through the bore, I don't know, 10 to 30 times. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a patch that has either like a CLP or some sort of lubricant, or even that bore cleaner still, and you're going to run that saturated patch down through the barrel, and it's going to have a bunch of gunk on it. What you're going to do after that is you're going to run one more saturated patch through there, and you look at that patch. If that patch has black on it still, or if it's starting to show, if you're trying to get copper out, it's going to show up as blue for a copper remover. What you're going to do is you're going to go through that process again. You're going to put that bore cleaner back through, let it sit, scrub it another 10 to 30 times, or however many times you feel like you need to do it, and then you're going to come back with another patch, and then you're going to come back with one more patch. And what that's doing is that's showing you what you've done with your work, and that's just trying to gauge the barrel by using your patches. And honestly, that's it. That is the bulk of what you're going to have to do for an AR. So when you're done, take the bore guide out, right? And when you're cleaning, you can always clean the chamber as well, and I typically will take some sort of cleaner, and I can use the Q-tips, or I'll use whatever I can to get in there, and I'll work that chamber, make sure I get the solvent or any kind of debris or anything that's dirty that's in there out, right? So when you go to put your charging handle back, right, you're going to notice that you have these tabs, right, and these little wings right here on the end. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to capture this, but there is actually, you can kind of see these little tabs. Those are the holes that are in the slots right in there, right? So the easiest way to put this back together, what I'm going to do is I am going to put the charging handle inside there, and so it can move freely. And so what I do is I just put just a little bit of pressure, and it finds its home, right? And I push it in just a little bit. So then I take my bolt carrier, and if the bolt so the bolt can move in and out, and if the bolt is pushed in, your cam pin is going to be off to the side. And if you go to put your bolt carrier in there and it stops, it's a hard stop, what that means is that your bolt's pushed in. So you just need to pull that out, right? And your gas key is going to go inside the trench, right? So it's going to go in, right? and it just slides in, and that's how you put it back together, right? And that's your ejection port cover, and that's pretty much it, right? So then put your takedown pins back together, right? Shows your ejection port cover, and that's pretty much it. So that's the gist of taking apart your AR, where you have to go through cleaning it and reassembling it. I'll go ahead and save pistols for other videos because I don't want to get too long. So there you go. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and we will move on to other firearms to start disassemble, clean, and maintain. All right, see you in the next one.